The ink was still wet on the document, smearing slightly where a single hot tear had fallen. Across the mahogany table, amidst the festive scent of roasted turkey and expensive pine, Ethan didn't look remorseful. He looked bored. His mother, Victoria, swirled her vintage wine and smiled as if she'd finally taken out the trash. They thought they were discarding a burden, a broke, quiet girl who didn't fit their prestigious world. They had no idea that the signature Clara just placed on that paper wasn't a surrender. It was the trigger for the most brutal financial collapse their family would ever see. Because the woman they just kicked out into the snow wasn't a nobody. She was the only daughter of the man who owned their debt. The grandfather clock in the hallway of the Sterling Manor chimed 7 times, the sound echoing hollowly against the marble floors. It was Christmas Eve, a night that was supposed to be filled with warmth, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. But inside the dining room of the Sterling family, the air was cold enough to freeze water. Clara sat at the far end of the long table, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. She was wearing a simple navy dress, one she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was the best thing she owned. Around her, the dining room glittered with obscene wealth. The chandelier above was crystal, worth more than Clara's entire childhood home. The cutlery was heavy silver, polished to a mirror shine. At the head of the table sat Victoria Sterling, her mother-in-law. Victoria was a woman who wore diamonds like armor and viewed kindness as a weakness. To her right sat Ethan, Clara's husband of 3 years. Ethan wasn't looking at Clara. He was scrolling through his phone, a boredom etched into his handsome features that hurt more than anger would have. "Put the phone away, Ethan," Victoria said, though her tone was light, affectionate. "It's Christmas. We have business to attend to." Ethan sighed, sliding his phone into the pocket of his tailored Italian suit. "Right, let's just get this over with, Mother. I have a party to get to at the club by 9. Clara's heart gave a painful thud. A party? She had spent the last 2 days cooking this meal. She had roasted the goose, glazed the ham, and hand-peeled the chestnuts because Victoria claimed the staff never got the seasoning right. Clara's fingers were covered in small burns and cuts from the kitchen work. And now, Ethan was planning to leave before dessert. "Clara," Victoria said, her voice sharp, cutting through Clara's thoughts. "Yes, Victoria." Clara looked up, trying to keep her face neutral. "Do you know why we are eating in the small dining room tonight? Why there are no guests?" Clara looked around. Usually, the Sterlings hosted a massive Christmas gala. Tonight, it was just the 3 of them. I assumed you wanted a quiet family evening." Victoria let out a short, cruel laugh. She reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. She tossed it across the polished wood. It slid aggressively, stopping just inches from Clara's water glass. "We wanted a quiet evening, because we didn't want witnesses for the cleanup," Victoria sneered. "Open it." Clara's hands shook as she reached for the envelope. She knew what this was. Deep down, she had known for months. The late nights Ethan spent at the office. The smell of perfume on his collar that wasn't hers, something expensive, like Chanel No. 5, while Clara wore vanilla oil. The way they stopped inviting her to company events because she didn't have the look. She pulled out the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words seemed to swim before her eyes. "Ethan?" Clara whispered, looking at her husband. "On Christmas Eve?" Ethan finally looked at her. His eyes were cold, devoid of the love he had promised her 3 years ago, when she was just a struggling art student, and he was the rebellious son trying to prove he didn't care about money. That phase had ended quickly once his father died, and he inherited the CEO position of Sterling Dynamics. "It's the best time, Clara," Ethan said, his voice flat. "New year, new start. Ideally, without you." "I cooked your dinner," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I ironed your shirt for this morning. I've supported you when the board tried to vote you out last year. I stayed up with you every night when you were crying because you couldn't handle the pressure." "Stop being dramatic," Victoria snapped. "You were a placeholder, dear. Ethan needed a little charity case to make himself look grounded to the board of directors. A humble wife makes a CEO look stable. But now, Sterling Dynamics is about to close the biggest merger in tech history with the Thorn Group. Ethan needs a wife who fits the part. Someone with pedigree, not whatever you are." Victoria waved a hand at Clara as if she were a bad smell. "You're an orphan, Clara. No connections, no money, no family name. You are an anchor dragging my son down." Clara looked down at the papers. "You're divorcing me because I'm poor?" "We're divorcing you because you are irrelevant," Ethan corrected, taking a sip of his wine. "And honestly, it's embarrassing. I walk into galas and people ask who you are. You don't know how to talk to investors. You don't know how to ski in Aspen. You're boring, Clara." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pen, a Mont Blanc fountain pen Clara had saved for 6 months to buy him for their first anniversary. He tossed it onto the papers. "Sign it," Ethan commanded. "The settlement is generous. We're giving you $10,000. That should last someone like you a year or two." $10,000. Ethan spent that on a single bottle of scotch. Clara felt a tear escape, hot and humiliating, rolling down her cheek. She wiped it away furiously. She looked at the man she loved, the man she thought was her family. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing a liability on a spreadsheet. "And if I don't sign?" Clara asked quietly. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Then we destroy you. We have lawyers who will drag this out until you are living in a cardboard box. We will sue you for emotional distress. We will invent stories about your infidelity. We will make sure you never get a job in this city again. Sign the papers, take the check, and get out of my house." Clara looked at the pen. She looked at the document. Inside her chest, something fractured. But it wasn't her heart breaking. It was her patience snapping. For 3 years, she had played the role they wanted. The quiet, grateful mouse. She had hidden her past, her true identity, because she wanted to be loved for herself, not for what her last name could buy. She wanted to know if Ethan loved Clara, the girl, or Clara, the heiress. Now she had her answer. She picked up the pen. The weight of it felt familiar. "You're right, Victoria," Clara said, her voice suddenly steady. The trembling in her hands stopped. She lifted her chin, looking directly into the older woman's eyes. "I don't fit in here." "Glad you finally have some self-awareness," Victoria scoffed. Clara uncapped the pen, and $10,000 is an interesting number. "It's more than you deserve," Ethan muttered. Clara signed her name. Clara V. She didn't write Sterling. She signed with her initial. She pushed the papers back across the table. "There," Clara said, standing up. She didn't touch the food she had spent all day preparing. "You have your divorce. Consider it my Christmas gift. I hope the merger with the Thorn Group goes exactly as you deserve." Ethan snatched the papers, checking the signature. He didn't notice the missing last name. He just saw the ink and smirked. Finally, "Get your things," Victoria said, waving a hand toward the door. "The driver will drop you at the bus station. We aren't paying for an Uber." "That won't be necessary," Clara said. She reached for her purse, a worn leather bag that sat on the floor. "I have a ride coming." "A ride?" Ethan laughed. "Who? The pizza delivery guy?" Clara didn't answer. She walked to the heavy oak doors of the dining room. Before she left, she turned back one last time. The scene was picturesque. The rich mother and son, safe in their castle, victorious in their cruelty. "Merry Christmas, Ethan," she said softly. "Enjoy the silence." She walked out into the cold hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. As soon as she was out of sight, Clara's posture changed. The slump in her shoulders vanished. She pulled her phone from her pocket, a cheap burner phone she used around them, and dropped it into the trash can by the door. From the inner pocket of her coat, she pulled out a different phone. Sleek, black, satellite encrypted. She dialed a single number. It rang once. "Miss Thorne," a deep voice answered instantly. "It's done, Marcus," Clara said, her voice ice-cold, shedding the meek persona she had worn for 3 years like a heavy coat. "They signed. I'm waiting outside." "Understood, Ma'am. We are 30 seconds away. And your father?" "Tell Daddy I'm coming home," Clara said, pushing open the front doors of the manor. "And tell him to freeze the assets, all of them." Outside, the snow was falling heavily, blanketing the long driveway of the Sterling estate. But the silence of the night was about to be broken. Coming up the driveway wasn't a taxi. It wasn't a bus. Piercing through the snowstorm were the blinding LED headlights of a convoy. 3 blacked-out Cadillac Escalades, followed by a Rolls-Royce Phantom with diplomatic flags on the fenders. Clara stood on the steps, the wind whipping her hair, watching the vehicles that belonged to her real-life approach. Inside the dining room, Ethan poured champagne. "To the merger," he toasted, clinking glasses with his mother. And to the Thorne family money. They had no idea that the Thorne family money had just walked out their front door. Inside the dining room, the silence that followed Clara's departure was thick. Victoria took a sip of her wine, her eyes fixed on the window, where the snow swirled violently against the glass. "Finally," she breathed out, setting the crystal glass down on the coaster. "I thought she would cry more. It's almost insulting how quietly she left." Ethan stood up, walking over to the window to look out at the driveway. He loosened his tie, feeling a strange mixture of relief and irritation. He had expected begging. He had prepared speeches to counter her pleas for money. But she had just walked out. Suddenly, beams of light cut through the darkness of the front lawn. Ethan squinted. "Mother," Ethan said, frowning. "Is the legal team supposed to come tonight? I thought the due diligence meeting for the merger was scheduled for the 26th. Victoria frowned and walked to the window. "No one is coming tonight." "Why?" "Look." They watched as the convoy of 3 black Cadillac Escalades and the massive Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the front portico. The vehicles were imposing, taking up the entire circular driveway. They screamed power. They screamed authority. "My God!" Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. "That's the Thorne family crest on the flags. I saw it in the dossier. That's Alexander Thorne's private detail." Ethan straightened his jacket, panic and excitement warring in his chest. "Why are they here? Do you think the old man came personally to seal the deal on Christmas Eve? Maybe he wants to test our commitment." "It has to be," Victoria said, frantically smoothing her dress. "He's known for being eccentric. Quick, Ethan. The door. Don't let him wait. If Alexander Thorne is here, we need to impress him immediately. Forget about Clara. She's probably halfway down the road by now." Ethan rushed to the grand double doors of the manor. He threw them open, bracing himself against the biting wind. He put on his best winning smile, the one he used to charm investors. He watched as a mountain of a man in a black trench coat stepped out of the lead Escalade. The man, Marcus, ignored Ethan completely. He walked to the rear door of the Rolls-Royce and opened it. Ethan took a step forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Thorne, what an unexpected honor." His voice died in his throat. Mr. Thorne didn't step out. Instead, a figure walked toward the car from the shadows of the manor's pillars. It was Clara. Ethan blinked, confused. "Clara! What are you doing? Get away from that car. That is Mr. Thorne's vehicle, you embarrassing—" Clara didn't even look at him. She paused at the open door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior light glowed warm and gold, revealing plush leather seats and a waiting glass of champagne. Marcus, the giant bodyguard, bowed his head slightly. "Welcome home, Miss Thorne. Your father is on the line." Clara handed her old coat to Marcus, as if he were a coat check attendant. Underneath, she was still wearing the simple navy dress, but the way she stood had changed. She looked like a queen ascending her throne. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying over the wind, clear and sharp. Ethan stood frozen on the porch, snow wetting his expensive Italian loafers. "Clara? Wait. Why are you—" Clara turned just before entering the car. She looked at Ethan, shivering in the doorway, and then at the warm, bulletproof sanctuary of the Rolls-Royce. She offered him a small, pitying smile. "I told you I had a ride, Ethan," she said. She slipped into the car. The heavy door thudded shut with a sound like a vault closing. "Wait!" Ethan yelled, stumbling down a step. "Clara, who are you?" The driver didn't wait. The convoy began to move, the tires crunching over the snow, leaving Ethan Sterling standing alone in the cold, staring at the red taillights fading into the night. Inside the Rolls-Royce, the silence was absolute, insulating Clara from the howling wind. She leaned back into the heated massage seats. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it was from the adrenaline of freedom. She picked up the secure satellite phone resting on the center console. "Hello, Daddy," she whispered. "Clara." A deep, gravelly voice answered. It was a voice that made prime ministers nervous, but to her it was just safety. Alexander Thorne, the founder of the Thorne Group, the man worth $40 billion. "Are you out?" "I'm out," she said. "I signed the papers." "Did they hurt you?" The voice dropped an octave, dangerous and low. "Not physically," Clara said, looking out the window as the trees of the Sterling estate blurred past. "But they broke everything else, Dad. They humiliated me. They threw me away like garbage because they thought I was poor." "They made a fatal error," Alexander said. "I assume the Christmas merger is off?" Clara hardened her heart. She thought of Victoria's sneer. She thought of the $10,000 settlement check. She thought of the 3 years she spent cooking, cleaning, and trying to be enough, only to be traded in for a business deal. "No, Dad," Clara said, her eyes flashing. "Don't cancel the meeting. Let the merger proceed." "Excuse me?" Alexander sounded surprised. "I want to be there," Clara said. "The acquisition of Sterling Dynamics is scheduled for tomorrow morning, right? The final signing?" "Yes, December 26th, 9:06 a.m. "Good," Clara said. "I'll see them there. But Dad, I don't want to buy their company anymore." "What do you want to do then, Princess?" Clara watched the gates of the Sterling estate open for her convoy. "I want to bankrupt it. I want to buy their debt, call in their loans, and take everything they own. I want Ethan to know exactly who he divorced." Alexander Thorne let out a low chuckle. "That's my girl. The jet is waiting at the private airfield. We'll be in Manhattan by midnight. Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow, we go to war. December 26th, 8:30 a.m., Sterling Dynamics headquarters, downtown metropolis. The morning after Christmas was usually quiet in the financial district, but the top floor of the Sterling Dynamics tower was buzzing with nervous energy. Ethan Sterling paced the length of the boardroom, checking his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked impeccable in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, but his eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept. The image of Clara getting into the Rolls-Royce had haunted him all night. Victoria had convinced him it was a misunderstanding. She probably knows the driver, Victoria had argued over breakfast. Maybe she's dating a chauffeur. Don't be ridiculous, Ethan. Clara is a nobody. Focus on the merger. He tried to believe her. He had to believe her. Because if he didn't, the reality was too terrifying to contemplate. Sit down, Ethan, Victoria hissed from the head of the table. She looked regal in emerald green silk. You're making the board members nervous. The board of directors sat around the long oak table, murmuring amongst themselves. They were old money, men and women who cared only about share prices. The Thorn Group delegation is late, Mr. Henderson, the CFO muttered, wiping sweat from his bald head with a handkerchief. They are never late. They'll be here, Ethan said, projecting confidence he didn't feel. This deal is the crown jewel of their portfolio. They need our proprietary AI technology. Do they? Henderson asked nervously. Because I tried to access our bridge loan from their bank this morning to cover the end-of-year bonuses, and the system gave me an error code. Access denied, pending review. Ethan's stomach dropped. Just a glitch. It's a holiday weekend. I hope so, Henderson whispered. Because if that loan doesn't come through, Sterling Dynamics is technically insolvent by noon. Just then, the double doors of the boardroom swung open. The room went silent. Walked in was not the usual team of lawyers. 6 men in dark suits entered first, taking positions along the walls. They were security, but they moved like special forces. Then, Alexander Thorne walked in. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes like flint. He walked with a cane, but he didn't look frail. He looked like he could bludgeon someone with it. Ethan scrambled to his feet. Mr. Thorne, what an honor. We expected your vice president, but to have the legend himself. Alexander didn't look at Ethan. He walked to the opposite end of the table and pulled out a chair. He didn't sit. He turned to the door. Gentlemen, Alexander boomed, his voice filling the room. And Mrs. Sterling, I believe you know the new CEO of the Thorn Group's acquisition division. She will be leading this negotiation. Ethan frowned. She? A woman stepped into the room. The sound of Victoria dropping her porcelain coffee cup shattered the silence. It crashed onto the floor, spilling hot coffee over her expensive shoes. But she didn't move. She couldn't move. It was Clara. But it wasn't the Clara they knew. The thrift store dresses were gone. She was wearing a tailored white Chanel power suit that fit her like a second skin. On her wrist was a Patek Philippe watch worth more than Ethan's car. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was blown out in sleek, glossy waves. She wore red lipstick that looked like war paint. She walked into the room, the click of her heels sounding like gunshots in the silence. She walked right past Ethan. She didn't even blink at him. She took the seat at the head of the table, opposite Victoria. She sat down, opened a leather folder, and looked up. Good morning, Clara said. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and utterly unrecognizable from the timid wife of 3 years. Shall we begin? Clara, Ethan whispered, his face draining of all color. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. What is this joke? There is no joke, Mr. Sterling, Clara said coldly. She didn't call him Ethan. I am Clara Victoria Thorne, daughter of Alexander Thorne, and as of this morning, I am the majority shareholder of the debt your company owes." "That's impossible," Victoria screeched, standing up. "You're an orphan. You worked in a library. You have nothing." "I chose to live simply," Clara said, her eyes locking onto Victoria's. "I wanted to see if I could find a family who loved me for me, not for my father's checkbook. I wanted to see if I could build a life based on trust." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I found my answer yesterday at dinner," Clara continued, "when you handed me divorce papers because I didn't fit the image." The board members were looking back and forth between Clara and the Sterlings, horror dawning on their faces. "Mr. Thorne," one of the board members stammered, You knew about this?" Alexander Thorne smiled, a shark-like grin. "My daughter wanted a humble life. I indulged her. But when someone hurts my daughter, I stop being indulgent." Ethan fell back into his chair. "Clara, please, let's talk about this. In private. We're married. We can fix this." "Actually," Clara said, pulling a document from her folder, "we aren't." She slid the paper down the table. It was the divorce petition he had forced her to sign the night before. "You were in such a rush, Ethan," Clara said softly. "You wanted it effective immediately. My lawyers filed it at 8 a.m. this morning. The judge granted an expedited decree due to irreconcilable differences and the waiver of the cooling-off period, which you insisted on." She tapped the paper. "You are a single man, Ethan, which is fortunate because you're about to be a very poor one." "What do you mean?" Henderson, the CFO, squeaked. Clara opened a second file. "Sterling Dynamics has been leveraging its assets based on the projected merger with Thorne Group. You've borrowed heavily against your future stock price. You used the company pension fund to cover the operational costs of your private jets. And you, Ethan, used company funds to buy a penthouse in Miami last week. Is that correct?" Ethan couldn't speak. He was sweating profusely. "That is embezzlement," Clara stated. "We can explain," Victoria shouted. "It was an advance." "It doesn't matter," Clara said, closing the folder, "because the Thorne Group is withdrawing its offer to merge." Chaos erupted. "You can't do that," a board member yelled. "Our stock will tank." "It already has," Clara said, glancing at her watch. "I released a press statement 5 minutes ago announcing that the deal is dead due to financial irregularities discovered during due diligence. Your stock has dropped 40% in the last 4 minutes." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "I'm not here to merge with you, Ethan. I'm here to foreclose on you," she signaled to Marcus. "Get them out of my boardroom. The auditors are waiting downstairs." "You can't do this!" Victoria screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. Her voice cracked, high and shrill, echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. "I am Victoria Sterling. My husband built this building." "And his son lost it," Clara replied, her voice dangerously calm. She didn't stand up. She didn't raise her voice. She simply gestured with a single manicured finger toward the door. "Remove them." 2 security guards, thick-necked and impassive, stepped forward. They weren't the usual building security. These were Thorne Group contractors. They didn't care about the Sterling name. One guard grabbed Ethan by the upper arm. "Don't touch me!" Ethan snarled, trying to jerk his arm away. "I'm the CEO." "Former CEO," Clara corrected, not looking up from her papers. "Currently, you are a trespasser. And since you mentioned the embezzlement of company funds for that Miami penthouse, I believe the police are waiting in the lobby. I'd suggest you go quietly, unless you want handcuffs in front of your employees." Ethan froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "Police?" Fraud is a serious crime, Ethan, Clara said, finally looking him in the eye. You used the employee pension fund as your personal piggy bank. Did you think no one would notice? Or did you just think you were too important to be caught? Clara, please, Ethan's voice broke. He stopped fighting the guard. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, trembling fear. I did it for us. I wanted to give us a better life. Don't, Clara cut him off, sharp as a knife. You did it for yourself. You did it to buy jewelry for that woman you've been seeing at the Sapphire Club. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending it was for me. Ethan's mouth fell open. You knew? I'm a thorn, Ethan, Clara said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. We know everything. Now get out. The guards shoved them forward. Ethan stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet. Victoria was sobbing now, clutching her son's arm as they were marched out of the boardroom. The walk to the elevator was a gauntlet of humiliation. The glass walls of the executive offices meant that every employee, the secretaries Ethan had ignored, the junior analysts he had mocked, the janitors he never made eye contact with, saw them. They saw the great Ethan Sterling and the imperious Victoria Sterling being escorted out like common criminals. Heads popped up from cubicles. Whispers spread like wildfire. Phones were raised, cameras flashing. No photos, Victoria shrieked, shielding her face with her Chanel bag. I'll sue you all. Save your money for bail, Mom, Ethan muttered, staring at the floor. When the elevator doors opened in the lobby, the nightmare got worse. Clara hadn't just called the police. She had tipped off the press. A wall of noise hit them the moment they stepped onto the marble floor of the lobby. Flashbulbs erupted like strobe lights. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Mr. Sterling, is it true the company is bankrupt? Mrs. Sterling, comment on the allegations of fraud. Ethan, did you really divorce the daughter of Alexander Thorne on Christmas Eve? Ethan shielded his eyes, blinded by the lights. No comment. No comment. They pushed through the crowd, desperate to get to the curb where their driver, Jenkins, was usually waiting with the company limo. They burst out the revolving doors into the freezing December air. Jenkins! Ethan yelled, looking for the black Mercedes. Jenkins, get the car! But the Mercedes wasn't there. Instead, a tow truck was backing up to Ethan's personal Aston Martin, which was parked in the VIP spot. Jenkins was standing on the sidewalk, holding a box of his personal belongings. He looked at Ethan with a mixture of pity and resignation. Jenkins, open the door, Victoria demanded, rushing toward him. I can't, Mum, Jenkins said, shaking his head. I've been let go, and the cars, the bank ordered them repossessed 10 minutes ago. All company assets are frozen. What? Ethan stared at the tow truck driver, who was hooking chains to the bumper of his beloved sports car. Hey, stop! That's mine! Not anymore, buddy, the driver grunted, not even looking at him. Bank says it belongs to the creditors now. Ethan turned around, panic rising in his throat like bile. He looked up at the skyscraper he used to rule. Standing in the window of the top floor, looking down like a god from Olympus, was a silhouette. Clara. She was watching them. Victoria began to hyperventilate. Ethan, how are we going to get home? My cards. My cards are in the office, safe. Ethan reached for his wallet. He pulled out his black Amex. He turned to a nearby taxi that had stopped to watch the commotion. I'll give you $500 to drive us to Sterling Manor, Ethan told the driver. The taxi driver looked at the card, then at his phone where the news was already breaking. Sterling dynasty crumbles. Fraud exposed. Sorry, pal, the driver sneered. Machine's broken. He drove off. Ethan stood on the curb, the snow soaking into his suit, his mother sobbing into his shoulder, while the cameras continued to flash. It took them 3 hours to get back to the Sterling Manor. They had to take a public bus, a humiliation that made Victoria retch, and then walk the last mile up the long, snowy driveway because the bus didn't go into the wealthy estates. By the time they reached the front door, Victoria's heels were broken and Ethan's hands were numb. "We'll fix this," Ethan muttered, his teeth chattering as he fumbled for his house keys. "I'll call Isabella. Her father is a senator. He can pull strings. She loves me. She'll help us." Isabella. The woman he had been cheating with. The woman he thought was his perfect match. Rich, glamorous and exciting. Unlike boring, quiet Clara. He shoved the key into the lock. It didn't turn. "What is it now?" Victoria moaned, shivering. "It's stuck," Ethan grunted, jiggling the handle. "The key won't work." "That's because the locks have been changed," a voice said from the other side of the door. The heavy oak door swung open. Standing there wasn't the housekeeper. It was a woman in a red silk robe, holding a glass of wine. Ethan's eyes widened. "Isabella!" For a second, relief washed over him. "Isabella! Thank God! Did you hear? It's been a nightmare! Let me in! It's freezing!" He moved to step inside, but Isabella didn't move. She leaned against the doorframe, a cruel smirk on her lips. "I don't think so, Ethan," she said lazily. "What?" Ethan stopped. "Babe, what are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I have the keys," Isabella said, dangling a new set of brass keys from her finger. "The new owner gave them to me." "New owner?" Victoria gasped. "This is our house." "Was," Isabella corrected. "Technically, the house belonged to the company. And since the company defaulted on its debt this morning, the primary creditor seized the assets, including this property." She took a sip of wine. "And the primary creditor, Miss Thorne, is very generous. She knew I was looking for a place to stay." Ethan felt like he had been punched in the gut. You know Clara?" Isabella laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. "Ethan, darling, I work for Thorne Group. I've been the vice president of corporate espionage for 5 years." The world spun around Ethan. "What?" "You were a target," Isabella said, her voice dropping the sweet, seductive tone she had used for months. "We needed to know if Sterling Dynamics was actually profitable or just smoke and mirrors. Clara suspected you were cooking the books, but she needed proof. So she sent me." She looked him up and down with pure disgust. God, it was easy. You were so desperate to feel like a big man. A few compliments, a few expensive dinners, and you told me everything. Where the hidden accounts were, how you were faking the audit reports. You spilled your secrets like a leaky faucet just to impress me. Ethan fell to his knees in the snow. You never loved me." "Love you?" Isabella scoffed. "Please, you're a narcissist with a mommy complex. I endured you for the bonus. And let me tell you, the bonus Clara just gave me? It bought me a very nice vacation to the Maldives." "You snake!" Victoria lunged at her, but Isabella simply stepped back and slammed the door in her face. Click. The deadbolt slid home. "Isabella, open this door!" Ethan screamed, pounding on the wood. "My clothes are in there. My watch collection." "I put a box on the back porch," Isabella shouted through the door. "Whatever fit in a garbage bag is yours. The rest is being auctioned." Ethan slumped against the door, sliding down until he hit the cold stone of the porch. He buried his face in his hands. "This can't be happening," he sobbed. "This isn't real." "Ethan," Victoria whispered. She was staring at her phone, which had just lit up with a notification. Her face was grey. "What now, Mother?" Ethan snapped. "It's a live stream," she said, her voice trembling. "From Clara." Ethan grabbed the phone. On the screen, Clara was standing at a podium. She wasn't in a boardroom. She was in front of a massive, dilapidated brick building in the poorest part of the city. the orphanage where she had grown up. Reporters were gathered around her. "Today," Clara spoke into the microphones, looking radiant and powerful, "I am announcing the dissolution of Sterling Dynamics. The assets of the company, which were built on fraud and greed, will be liquidated." She paused, looking directly into the camera lens. Ethan felt like she was looking right at him. The proceeds from the sale of the Sterling private estate, including the manor and the luxury car collection, will be donated entirely to the New Beginnings Foundation. This foundation will provide housing and legal aid for women who have been discarded and financially abused by their partners. The crowd cheered. "And," Clara continued, "we are renaming the Sterling Manor. It will no longer be a monument to vanity. Starting tomorrow, it will be the city's largest homeless shelter." Ethan dropped the phone in the snow, his family home, his legacy, a homeless shelter. "We have nowhere to go," Victoria wailed, looking out at the darkening sky. "Ethan, we have no money, no home, no friends." Ethan looked at his mother. The woman who had told him to divorce Clara. The woman who had called Clara a placeholder. For the first time in his life, he didn't see a powerful matriarch. He saw a bitter, old woman shivering in a ruined dress. And he realized, with a clarity that shattered his soul, that he had traded a diamond for a rock. He had thrown away the only person who had ever truly loved him, the billionaire heiress who would have given him the world if he had just been kind. "Come on," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "Where?" Victoria asked. Ethan stood up and pointed toward the back of the house, where the garbage bags were waiting. "To the shed," he said. "It's the only place on the property that isn't locked. Maybe the police won't find us there until morning." As they trudged through the snow toward the garden shed, the snow began to fall harder, covering their tracks, erasing the Sterling name from the earth as if they had never existed. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel was the epicenter of the city's wealth. Tonight, the ballroom was bathed in golden light for the Phoenix Gala, the most exclusive event of the year. Tickets cost $5,000 a plate. In the back alley behind the kitchen, Ethan leaned against a dumpster, smoking a cigarette he had bummed from a dishwasher. He looked older than his years. His face was gaunt, the handsome features sharpened by malnutrition and stress. His once manicured hands were rough, the skin cracked from scrubbing pots. He adjusted his cheap, ill-fitting bow tie. He wasn't a guest tonight. He was a temp server, hired by an agency for minimum wage. "Hey, Sterling!" the floor manager barked, kicking the back door open. "Quit loitering. Table 1 needs champagne. Move it!" Ethan flinched. He hated that name now. It was a curse. After the scandal, no one would hire him. He was toxic. He and Victoria were living in a cramped, moldy studio apartment on the edge of town. Victoria spent her days staring at the wall, muttering about her lost diamonds. Ethan spent his scrubbing floors and serving the people he used to golf with. "I'm coming," Ethan muttered. He grabbed a tray of crystal flutes and walked into the ballroom. The noise hit him. Laughter, jazz, the clink of silverware. It was the sound of his old life. He kept his head down, terrified someone would recognize him. He weaved through the tables, placing drinks. "Server," a man called out. Ethan froze. He knew that voice. It was Greg Miller, his old college roommate and former business partner. Ethan walked over, praying Greg wouldn't look up. "Champagne, sir?" "Yeah, hit me," Greg said, distracted, looking toward the stage. "God, can you believe she's here? She looks incredible." Ethan poured the wine, his hand shaking slightly. He followed Greg's gaze to the stage. The lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice boomed, "please welcome the woman of the hour, the CEO of Thorn Enterprises and the founder of the New Beginnings Initiative, Ms. Clara Thorne. Ethan dropped the bottle. It smashed against the table, spraying expensive champagne over Greg Miller's tuxedo. "You idiot!" Greg shouted, jumping up. "Look what you—" Greg stopped. He looked at the server's face. He squinted. "Ethan," Greg whispered, his eyes widening. "Ethan Sterling? Is that you?" The table went silent. People turned to stare. The disgraced CEO, the fraudster, standing there in a stained waiter's uniform. But Ethan didn't hear them. He was staring at the stage. Clara walked out. She was breathtaking. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that shimmered like the night sky. Diamonds, real, heavy thorn diamonds, glittered at her throat. She looked powerful, serene, and utterly untouchable. She took the microphone, her eyes scanning the crowd. For a heartbeat, her gaze seemed to land on the commotion at table 1, on Ethan. She didn't flinch. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She looked through him as if he were part of the furniture, as if he were a ghost. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice smooth and confident. 6 months ago, I was told I didn't fit into this world. I was told I had no value. The crowd murmured. They knew the story. "But value isn't determined by a last name," Clara continued. "It is determined by integrity. Tonight, we raised $20 million for those who have been left behind." Ethan felt tears pricking his eyes. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run to the stage and beg her forgiveness. He wanted to tell her he missed her cooking, her laugh, her warmth. "Get him out of here," the floor manager hissed, grabbing Ethan by the collar. "You're fired, Sterling." "Wait," a voice commanded. Clara had stepped down from the stage. She was walking through the crowd. The sea of wealthy elites parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked straight to table 1. The floor manager froze. "Miss Thorne, I'm so sorry, this incompetent—" Clara held up a hand. Silence fell. She stood 2 feet from Ethan. She smelled of vanilla and power. Ethan fell to his knees. He couldn't help it. The shame was too heavy. "Clara," he choked out. "Clara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Look at me, I have nothing. Please, I still love you." The crowd watched, breathless. This was the drama they craved. The fallen prince begging the queen. Clara looked down at him. Her expression was unreadable. She reached into her clutch. Ethan's heart leapt. Was she going to give him money? A phone number? A second chance? She pulled out a single coin, a quarter. She placed it on his tray amidst the broken glass. "For the service?" Clara said softly. "Clara," Ethan whispered. "You said $10,000 should last me a year," Clara said, her voice loud enough for the table to hear. "I think 25 cents is accurate for the value you brought to my life." She turned around. "Marcus, let's go." "Yes, ma'am," the giant bodyguard said, appearing at her side. Clara walked away, her head high, leaving Ethan kneeling in spilled champagne, clutching a quarter, while the entire room erupted in whispers. The city was preparing to celebrate. Fireworks were being loaded onto barges in the harbor, and champagne corks were popping in penthouses across the skyline. But down on 4th Street, under the flickering amber light of a broken street lamp, there was no celebration. The wind howled through the cracked pavement, carrying with it the biting chill of a blizzard that refused to break. Ethan Sterling sat on the edge of a frozen curb, his expensive Italian suit now stained with mud and stiff with grime. Beside him sat 2 black garbage bags, the sum total of the Sterling legacy. Victoria sat on one of the bags, rocking back and forth. Her hair, once a perfectly coiffed helmet of blonde ambition, hung in greasy, graying strands around her face. She was muttering to herself, listing the names of people who weren't answering her calls. The senator. "He'll call back," she whispered, her teeth chattering. And the Davises. We summered with them in the Hamptons. They won't let us freeze. Ethan didn't have the heart to tell her that the Davises had blocked their numbers 3 days ago. He stared at his hands. They were raw, the knuckles split from the cold. Just a week ago, he had been serving champagne at the gala, hoping for a tip. Now, he was hoping the homeless shelter, the one Clara had built in his childhood home, had a spare cot. A black sedan slowed down as it passed them. For a second, Ethan's heart leapt. Is it help? Is it a friend? The window rolled down. It was a man Ethan recognized, a junior analyst he had fired 2 years ago for wearing cheap shoes. The man looked at Ethan, then at the garbage bags. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a ride. He simply took a photo with his phone, rolled the window up, and drove away into the warmth of the night. Ethan put his head in his hands. The humiliation was absolute. He had lost the company. He had lost the house. He had lost his dignity. But the worst part wasn't the poverty. It was the memory of Clara's eyes at the gala. She hadn't looked at him with hate. She had looked at him with indifference. That hurt more than any scream. High above the misery of the streets, in the penthouse suite of the Thorn Tower, the air smelled of roasting coffee and old money. Clara stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city. She was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a mug of hot tea. The silence here was heavy, but it was a peaceful heaviness. It was the silence of safety. The final audit is complete. A deep voice rumbled from behind her. Clara turned. Her father, Alexander Thorne, was sitting at his mahogany desk. The fireplace roared beside him, casting dancing shadows on the walls, lined with first edition books. He looked tired but satisfied. "Is it done?" Clara asked quietly. "Completely," Alexander said, removing his reading glasses. "The Sterling Dynamics acquisition has been finalized. We liquidated the toxic assets and retained the proprietary tech. The profit margin is already projecting at 15% for Q1. "And the staff?" Clara asked. She didn't care about the profit. "Retained," Alexander assured her. "All the employees Ethan tried to fire to save his own bonus? We gave them raises. The pension fund he raided has been replenished from his personal asset seizure." "You saved them, Clara." Clara nodded, a knot of tension releasing in her chest. "Good. Then it's over. I can finally close this chapter." "Not quite," Alexander said. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound portfolio. It looked ancient, the leather cracked with age. "There is one last document you need to see. I didn't show you this before because, well, I wanted to see if Ethan had even a shred of decency in him." Clara frowned, walking over to the desk. "What is it?" "Your grandmother's final will and testament," Alexander said, sliding the portfolio across the polished wood. "Specifically, the matrimonial trust clause." Clara opened the folder. The paper inside was yellowed parchment, covered in elegant looping calligraphy. She scanned the legal jargon until her father's finger landed on a paragraph near the bottom. Clause 4B. The fidelity provision. "Read it," Alexander urged softly. Clara read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "Upon the marriage of any female heir to the Thorne fortune, a sealed trust fund containing the sum of $500 million shall be held in escrow. This trust is to remain secret and inaccessible for a probationary period of exactly 3 years. Clara paused. 3 years? We were married for 3 years. "Keep reading," Alexander said, a dark amusement in his eyes. "If the marriage remains intact, and the spouse proves faithful and supportive upon the commencement of the 4th year, defined as 12:01 a.m., on December 25th, following the 3rd anniversary, The spouse shall be granted full co-signatory rights to 50% of the principal amount, as a reward for valuing the heir over the fortune. Clara stopped breathing for a moment. She looked up at her father, her eyes wide with shock. "Dad." "The timeline." "Do the math, Clara," Alexander said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You celebrated your 3rd anniversary on November 20th. The probationary period ended at 1 minute past midnight on Christmas Day." Clara's mind raced back to that night. The dinner, the cold goose, the way Ethan had tossed the pen at her. "He forced me to sign the divorce papers at 7 p.m. on Christmas Eve," Clara whispered. 5 hours, Alexander said, holding up 5 fingers. "He missed it by 5 hours. If he had just been kind, if he had just sat through that dinner, treated you like a human being, and waited until the sun came up to be a greedy monster, he would have woken up on Christmas morning with legal access to $250 million. Clara stared at the document. The irony was so sharp it almost cut her. Ethan had destroyed his marriage, his company, and his life chasing money. He had married her thinking she was poor, divorced her because she was holding him back, all while sitting unaware on a lottery ticket worth $500 million. "He never loved me," Clara said, her voice steadying. "Even if he had waited, he wouldn't have passed the faithful requirement. He was cheating with Isabella." "True," Alexander nodded. "But he didn't know we knew that. In his mind, he was 5 hours away from the greatest payday of his life, and he threw it away because he couldn't stand the sight of you in a thrift store dress." Alexander stood up and tossed the document into the roaring fireplace. "Greed makes men blind, Clara." He was so busy looking for gold in the distance that he didn't realize he was holding a diamond in his hand. They watched the paper curl and blacken in the flames. The fidelity provision turned to ash, just like the sterling name. Clara walked back to the window. Down below, the clock on the City Hall tower began to strike midnight. The first fireworks of the new year exploded in the sky, red, gold, and silver showers of light illuminating the darkness. "What happens to them now?" Clara asked, watching the celebration. "I bought the building they were renting," Alexander said casually. "The one with the mold. We're tearing it down next week to build a park for the orphanage. The eviction notice was served at 5 p.m. today." Clara looked down at the dark, cold streets. She pictured Ethan and Victoria down there, watching the same fireworks, freezing, hungry, and alone. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the Mont Blanc pen, the one Ethan had thrown at her to sign the divorce papers. She had kept it. "Do you want me to send a car for them?" Alexander asked, testing her. "It's 10 degrees below zero." Clara looked at the pen. She remembered the insults. She remembered Victoria calling her a placeholder. She remembered Ethan laughing when she said she had a ride. She turned to her father and dropped the pen into the trash can by the door. "No," Clara said. "They wanted a life without me. I'm simply giving them exactly what they asked for." She turned back to the window, the fireworks reflecting in her eyes like war paint. "Happy New Year, Dad." "Happy New Year, CEO Thorne." Down on the street, as the city cheered and the bells rang out, Ethan Sterling wrapped his arms around himself, shivering violently. He looked up at the penthouse far above, where the golden light spilled out into the night. He didn't know about the trust fund. He didn't know about the 5 hours. But as he sat in the dirt, he felt the crushing weight of a universe that had balanced its scales. He had signed his name on the paper, but Clara had written the ending. And that is the tragic, satisfying end of Ethan Sterling. He spent his whole life chasing gold, never realizing he was holding a diamond until he threw it away. It's a brutal reminder that when you marry someone, you marry their heart, not their wallet. But sometimes, karma makes sure you lose both if you can't tell the difference. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and the ultimate comeback, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories where the underdog takes everything back, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a twist. What would you have done if you were Clara? Would you have given him a second chance, or was the quarter exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.